Hello everyone, welcome again to this course Development Economics 2. The current lecture is about externalities and government regulations, and this is the second lecture in this series. In this lecture we will be learning about the features of a well-defined property rights system, how missing markets and absence of well-defined property rights impedes solution to corrective negative externalities in environment, what is Coasian bargaining and how it works, and limitations of Coasian bargaining. We will also learn about the direct government regulations, or what we call command and control policies. So we will first discuss command and control policies or direct government regulations. So till now we have seen that government can impose taxes or subsidies to control environmental externalities. Government can also issue tradable permits to cap the level of pollution or externality, and now we will look at more direct ways in which government can impact and make an impact in these situations. So government themselves can act as the owner of the common resources, and then it can directly regulate the use of these resources, right? So these regulations can be of two types. There can be quantity regulations and there can be tools regulations. Now quantity regulations can be once again of two types, where government can either specify the quantity of total pollution the polluter can make, or government can also specify the maximum limit of production itself, right? And secondly, government can also specify the tools or technologies that must be used to abate these externalities, right? Abate pollutions. Now the problem with these policies are that in absence of precise cost estimates, regulators must set somewhat arbitrary standards based on studies estimating the impact of pollutants. Government cannot be sure about the level of pollution and it can act in that way only. But it is generally these policies are more often used in less developing or less developed countries, because these policies are easier to implement than the other policies we have discussed, because these policies are much more direct in nature. But in many cases these policies fail due to the reason we have already discussed. Now we will come to the topic of property rights and Coasian bargaining, right? Now up till this point we have discussed all these policies where government intervenes, and government intervention was widely deemed to be necessary for solving the problem of externality. Now Professor Ronald Coase came with a new idea, right? He asked a key question, which is, are externalities really outside the market mechanism? So before this point of time, as we have seen that market mechanism cannot capture the effects of externality, and there arises the problem of free market equilibrium quantity not being socially optimal. But Ronald Coase contested that idea, right? So he said absence of property rights is a key reason why externality occurs in the first place. What do we mean by property rights? Let's define that here. So property rights are set of valid claims to a good or resource that permits its use and the transfer of its ownership through sale. According to Ronald Coase, there are some desirable properties of property rights, right? So property rights must be exclusive and well defined. So the reason behind this is the fact that if only when property rights are exclusive and well defined, only then people can be sure about who owns what and what are the exact rights they have on these resources, right? Secondly, property rights need to be secure, so these rights should be protected by a set of judiciary and enforcement bodies provided by the government. So this part we need, in this part we need government intervention, right? So only when property rights are secure, in those cases only property owners can be sure about their ownership, right? Thirdly, ownership must be valid over a long time horizon. So only when ownerships are valid over a long time horizon, then only the owners will invest in these resources, invest in these resources sustainably, keeping long time in their mind, right? So, and finally, rights must be transferable. So rights can be sold to these properties can be sold or bought in the market. Now here is a question to think about. List out some real world examples of tax and subsidy policies for environmental regulations. Now, according to Ronald Coase, externality itself is not the problem. The problem is either that the property rights do not exist or not well defined or vague, or there is significant transaction cost involved. So these transaction costs do not lead, because there is significant transaction cost, these property holders cannot involve in a successful bargaining. Next, he proposed that under certain circumstances, this problem can be solved by awarding property right to any of the party and taking away all transaction costs. No further government intervention will be needed to obtain a socially optimal solution. If property rights are well defined, the two parties may have enough information to have private bargaining and thus can enter into a complete contract. So complete contracts are contracts where all the rights are well defined, all the possible rights that can arise or all the possible solutions to the dispute that can arise in future are well defined. Now this idea provided by Coase that only assigning well defined property rights and having zero transaction cost can lead to successful bargaining and thus can solve the problem of externality. This idea became so influential that it came to be known as the Coase theorem. Let's first look at the assumptions of this theorem. Firstly, it assumes perfect competition. Secondly, it assumes consumers and producers are price takers. It also assumes there is a costless judiciary for enforcing agreements. It also assumes the consumers and producers are optimizing individuals, and there are no income and wealth effects, and finally there is no, and most importantly, there is no transaction costs involved. So part 1 of this theorem states, when there are well-defined property rights and costless bargaining, then negotiations between the party creating the externality and the party affected by the externality can bring about the socially optimal market quantity, right? So the first part basically says that assigning well-defined property rights and having zero transaction cost will ensure successful bargaining that can produce socially optimal levels of output. The second part of the theorem says the efficient solution to an externality does not depend on which party is assigned the property rights as long as someone is assigned these rights. So the second part basically says that it does not matter who has the right. the market, as long as the rights are well defined and there is zero transaction cost, the market will ensure that the optimal output is produced. Now we will look at this through a diagrammatic exposition. So let's assume that there is a chemical plant at upstream. There is a plant at upstream river, and it produces some polluting chemical discharges, and it discharges into the water, river water. So the river water gets polluted there, and there is a fishery downstream whose output is obviously affected by this activity. Now let's say let's first look at the free market equilibrium here. So here the equilibrium quantity is 9 and price is 5, right? But there is negative externality equal to which is equal to 2 rupees per unit. So as a result, the social marginal cost is higher and the and the socially efficient output is 6 units. When there is free market, the total external damage is depicted by the red shaded area here, right? Now let's take the first scenario where the pollutant firm has the right to the river, right? So if the polluting firm has the right to the river, it will produce to its own profit maximizing level of output, which is 9 here. Now at this point, the fishermen are facing total damage equal to the red shaded area here. Now if the fishermen convince the producer to reduce production by 1 unit, that is, it will reduce production from 9 to 8, their damage will go down by the green shaded area. So this is the marginal reduction in damage, or you can say marginal benefit due to reduction in pollution that is going to the fishermen. They will be willing to pay the producer up to this amount to reduce production to 8 units. Now the producer will lose profit by only the yellow shaded area in this diagram, and this is obviously lower than the green shaded area. So the producer will be happy as long as they are paying, these fishermen are paying more than this yellow shaded area, and fishermen, as we have discussed, will pay anything up to this green shaded area. Hence there will be a successful bargaining and the new output is now 8 unit. Now we are currently at 8 units and the fishermen are still facing some external cost equal to the red shaded area here, right? Now they will be willing to pay up to an amount equal to the green area once again to the producer to reduce the output by further 1 unit, right? This time the producer will lose profit equal to the yellow shaded area, which is still lower than the green shaded area. So once again there will be successful bargaining and the producer will now produce at level 7. This process will continue up to the socially optimal quantity of 6 unit is reached. Now the question is, can bargaining reduce the output further? Let's explore that question, right? So again the fishermen will offer up to the same amount, which is the green shaded area here, to reduce output by 1 unit by the producer. But now see, the producer will lose a large amount of profit, which is equal to this yellow area. Large or not large, it is greater than the green shaded area. Hence This means the producer will require more than what the fishermen are offering to reduce the pollution, right? Hence, there will be no successful bargaining, right? This means in this process, the output will be at 6 only, which is the socially optimal output. Hence, we end up with the socially efficient output of 6 units. Now, let's look at a second scenario. In this second scenario, now the fisherman has the right to the river, right? So, now when fishermen are having the right to the river, they will not allow to produce anything by the producer that will give them the zero pollution, right? Hence, they will not allow the producer to produce anything, right? So, currently in this case the producer cannot pollute the river at all, hence the initial output is 0. Now, if the producer can produce 1 unit, she can gain substantial profit, which is equal to this yellow area in this diagram, and the fisherman's damage, the damage due to this 1 unit of production is equal to the red shaded area here, right, which is lower than the yellow shaded area we have already seen. Hence, there will be successful bargaining and the new output will be 1, right. So, this process will continue up to, continue up to the socially optimal output of 6 is reached. So, now this shows, this whole thing shows that firstly, it basically proves the Coase theorem that firstly, as long as we have well defined property rights and zero transaction cost, socially optimal output will be reached, and secondly, it does not matter who has the right to the resource, the polluter or the affected party, the socially optimal will be reached anyway. Now, let us look at some of the limitations of Coasian bargain solutions, right. So, first of all, in real world, in most of the cases, there will be substantial transaction costs. Now, what are these transaction costs? These are cost of entering into a transaction over and above the exchange of money for a good, right. In many cases, when there are lot of parties involved, transaction cost will be high. There will be also cost of enforcing this bargain, and hence there are very rare cases where transaction costs are actually very low or 0, right. So, even if all property rights are well defined, successful bargaining does not take place in many real world cases. Economists say the reason is transaction costs. Then there can be assignment problems. So, in many cases, especially in case of common pool resources, it is difficult to assign the right to some specific parties. So, in those cases, Coasian bargaining cannot take place, right. Thirdly, the holdout problem is there. So, holdout problem happens when some party, if the right to the property is distributed to several parties, then one party's decision can hamper or break down the bargaining process. So, let us say there are 10 fishermen in our example, and if 8 or 9 fishermen agrees to a bargaining and 2 of them do not agree, then the whole bargaining process breaks down, right. So, these kind of problems happen in real world. And finally, there is this free rider problem. So, when there is free rider problem, when there are lot of parties involved in a bargaining, some of the parties involved can always walk out of the bargaining and pay nothing and still accrue the benefit of this bargaining solution. So, for example, we know that international environmental treaties or pollution control treaties are signed, right? Or carbon emission treaties are signed, and it is always possible for one or more country to walk out of the treaty, because in that case it will not pay anything, or it will not commit anything for the treaty, but still get the benefit of overall lower pollution, right? Hence, it is often difficult to implement Coase theorem in real world. Finally, let's look at some take-home points. Governments can directly regulate the quantity or tools to control pollution. Secondly, we have learned that Coase theorem suggests an alternative to government intervention for solving externality problem. We have also learned that Coase theorem suggests if property rights are clearly defined and there is zero transaction costs, then private bargaining will lead to socially efficient outcomes. We have also learned that Coase theorem also says it does not matter which party is assigned the property right in order to obtain socially efficient outcome. And finally, we have seen that it is often difficult to implement Coase theorem in the real world. Thank you.